fate lives within us. You only have to be brave enough to see it. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Bucket Think Tank for Disney Royalty, number 10, Brave Merida. So, Brave is sort of a weird film, I think. It's decent to be sure, and it's probably really good for some people, and I don't want to take anything away from that. But at the same time, it feels as if we've sort of missed the mark on one or two aspects. This is one of those movies that really relies on having a really strong message, a really strong relationship that sort of carries it. Or sometimes, to the film's own detriment, that one aspect is really strong and it takes away from everything else. With Brave, I want to say the strongest aspect is the relation between Merida and her mother, Queen Eleanor. But at the same time, the rest of it just sort of feels a bit flat, and even the relation between Merida and Eleanor seems like it's having its own problems and weaknesses. But let's just sort of slow down and focus on the premise of the movie. So, it has two sort of really important elements to it that don't include, well, still include Eleanor and Merida, but this is stuff that's happening around them. So Merida is of age to pick a suitor, and she doesn't want to, pick a suitor yet, or rather she just doesn't want to at all. She doesn't quite know, but she doesn't want to have to make that choice. This is sort of where Merida becomes a bit stereotypical, but not truly stereotypical, in the fact that she's a princess who doesn't want to be a princess. We don't actually see a lot of that, despite what some people may say. Then we go to Merida turning her mother into a bear, accidentally, but it sort of helps turn the movie in a different direction, but still focusing on the primary story, which is the relationship between Merida and Eleanor, which was not the original intention until the directors switched places. The original draft, from what I've heard, or the original version, was supposed to have more aspect of the magic. It's also important to know that this is a film that is sort of a Disney Pixar brainchild. And to me, it always feels like it's Pixar attempting to tell a Disney story. And I don't think they're quite good at it. I mean, they picked the obvious genre for a Disney movie, a Disney princess. And Merida was even coronated. She even had a coronation where she was made a Disney princess. So we know this is a Disney princess film. But it's sort of missing in some places. It does feel more like it has the Disney bones, but underneath is a Pixar movie. And the problem is the two aren't exactly in happy marriage. So let's take a look at something that Pixar does that Disney doesn't. And then something that Pixar usually does that Disney is usually okay with, but Pixar didn't. So one thing Pixar does that at this time Disney didn't do was have two parents consistently throughout the film. We've never done that. Also, we've never had a movie like this not end in some form of, romance. But, whatever. It's not something that's needed. I think a lot of people felt that Mulan didn't need to end with, Mulan inviting Shang over for dinner, or Shang, secretly having a crush on Mulan. You could argue that didn't need to happen. So it was interesting to see the two parents go, and Eleanor and Fergus are really great characters, especially Fergus. I think Eleanor was obviously going to be great because, she has the most time with Merida, but Fergus is allowed to just sort of be on his own. And we see that Fergus is someone who loves his family, and he loves pretty much, he's sort of like if Robert Baratheon married Catelyn Stark. And Game of Thrones, I think, plays a big deal with this movie, at least in terms of appreciating exactly what it's trying to do. Something that Pixar does, and Disney usually does, but Pixar didn't, was keep everyone alive. Pixar and Disney have never been ones to shy away from the fact that, oh yeah, someone's died. All right, the Lion King, the Sword and the Stone actually has the opening song is "The Good King Had Died." Like, it's done. The original Disney princess films usually involve a dead family member, usually happening before the movie starts. And this movie had a prologue, and in that prologue we probably should have killed off Fergus, and I think Fergus would have been a great addition to the story. Like, if Fergus had died and he became the Will-o'-the-Wisp, I think that would have added a sort of extra level to the story. And the lords coming in to present their sons, they're more caricatures than they are characters. You sort of get what's going on here. They're each presenting a suitor for Merida to pick, and whichever one is able to win Merida's hand, they'll be granted special favor. It technically will be whoever Merida marries whose banner will become that of king. So in a lot of ways, the royal houses will switch. So ideally, oh no, that's not true because they still have three sons. So it's debatable exactly how this is going to happen. But from a medieval standpoint, um, Merida will probably just go live with one of them. So, and it's a bit sad that the movie doesn't play up to the fact that all those changes would come from Merida getting married. Instead, it goes to the fact that Merida just doesn't want to do it, and that sort of hurts Merida's character a bit because she comes off as more selfish and entitled. So we've only actually had one princess who goes around refusing suitors, and that was Jasmine. Jasmine's argument was that, she didn't want to have to marry someone she didn't know. She wanted to marry someone for love, and that's great, but the Sultan doesn't point out the fact that's not how this works. All right, yeah, if you have to get married, I had to get married, your mother had to get married, and if you end up, falling in love, that's great, that's golden, but the purpose of this is not love, it's about strengthening alliances. And Merida even seems to be aware of that when she has a bit of a tantrum after, it turns out that, they're coming. She says, like, oh, just tell the princess, tell them the princess is not intending to get married and will be accepting your declarations of war later. She's sort of aware of that. As a matter of fact, points to this movie for actually showing exactly what is expected of a royal child. This isn't just something expected of princesses. Of Princess too, when Eleanor is teaching her how to speak properly, how to play an instrument. Granted, that's more the line of princesses, as well as geography, history. These are things that royal children have to learn to step into the role. The idea they spend all their time just doing whatever is actually kind of a lie. Merida herself is just sort of not willing to do it, and I think, as we'll see in this movie, it's not that she doesn't want to do it. She doesn't think she's good at it. And I think it's because her mother's so great at managing it that she feels like she's never going to be as good as her mother. That's just a theory. It doesn't quite work if you see how they go back and forth. But we do see that there is a certain amount of respect that the two of them have for each other. And as Fergus points out, the problem is they're too similar. While Merida does like what her father likes, and she's definitely daddy's girl, she really gets a lot of her stubbornness, her hard-headedness, her resourcefulness from her mother. And that's why the two of them have such a hard time connecting. Because despite what people may think, you really don't get along well with people who are a lot like you. It can be a bit frustrating, especially when you have different tastes and opinions on things. So where does this movie sort of fall apart? And it's not really Merida refusing to get married. It's actually everything leading up to Merida leaving is sort of where it all falls apart. And Merida taking her fate into her own hands. It's actually one of the weird moments where we see the fate aspect sort of play in here. When she enters the archery tournament, says like, I'll be competing for my own hand, which probably led to some other issues had that played out. But everything about that scene, the dress making it hard for her to move or breathe. We've seen that before. We saw it in Pirates of the Caribbean. It's sort of the idea that, the fact that, she has no say in what happens to her, that, she's sort of crushing under the traditions and cultures of society is causing a problem. And then when she competes in the archery tournament, it's her, breaking out of that dress, breaking out of it and in her way charting her own course, which leads to the fight with Eleanor and Merida, which I actually love that scene. I think that scene's really great because they both they don't let cooler heads prevail because they're both so passionate, both so stubborn about this, that there's no way for them to hear each other until they do something that just totally hurts them. If words won't reach you, action will. When Merida cuts the tapestry, the quilt, it leads to Eleanor snapping, taking the bow, throwing it into the fire. They both cross a line, and neither one of them realize it until after the fact. And Merida doesn't realize until way near the end of the film, and Eleanor realizes it pretty much the moment Merida's gone. So then Merida wants to change her fate, and she thinks the way to change her fate is to magically change her mother. And then afterwards, Merida doesn't really... She's pretty set on avoiding responsibility for this. Like, well, no, if this wouldn't have happened if you just let me, not get married or something along those lines. A lot of that film with the relationship between Eleanor and Merida is sort of Merida like tormenting her mother a bit. And it doesn't work out well, in my opinion. On the one half, though, because Eleanor can't talk, they both have to listen to each other. Merida has to pick up on the subtle cues of Eleanor, and Eleanor has to flat out hear what Merida's saying. And it doesn't quite work because neither one of them says or does anything that really has a moment. What they really have is just a moment where they're just, hanging out together. It's just, mother daughter time, which, maybe they don't have enough of that. They don't have enough where they both try to do something they can mutually enjoy. Otherwise, it's just lessons. And then, of course, we get to the speech that Merida gives to stop the lords and her father from fighting, and it with a little gentle coaching from her mother, Merida's able to do everything she's been trained to do, everything she's been brought up to know how to do. She does it very well. Because in the beginning, she's the one that's able to calm them down, but exactly where she goes from there, she needs Eleanor for. And Eleanor, with some clever pantomiming, is able to help Merida decide. And even then, she says, like, you know what? She's not ready, and we'll just have to wait. And it turns out the princes are also equally interested. Like, yeah, I don't quite want to marry this girl I don't know. It's sort of the suspension of disbelief of the medieval society that sort of makes this float. It's fine. I mean, it's no one said this is super historically accurate. I mean, if going by from what I've seen and heard about this movie, bears were pretty much extinct by the time this movie would have taken place. But that's besides the point. That's besides the point. We're not here to cinema sins this or historically nerd this, whatever you want to pick. The story of the four brothers, I think, really helps encapsulate this movie and what it wants to do. This sort of cautionary tale exactly what happens when one prioritizes their needs and desires over the good of the collective, or rather the good of the community over the good of family. If we had to compare this to Game of Thrones, which we kind of have to, I think, to really appreciate it, you have to sort of view Queen Eleanor as Catelyn Stark. And it's important she's Catelyn Stark because she's of House Tully, and the words of House Tully are family, duty, and honor. Everything Eleanor does, everything Catelyn does, is to protect the family, is to do her duty, and for the honor of her house. That's what she does. That's what Eleanor does, and she's really good at it. And Merida is the sort of disrespectful, spoiled child, doesn't realize how good she has it, and doesn't really want to commit to it. You've all figured out exactly who our parallel is going to be for this. But before we get to that, let's just sort of really sum up this movie's direction. The concept of fate doesn't quite work here, but then again, also the magic doesn't work here. We have a sort of incompetent witch who is more interested in telling, the story and showing off. Points for her trying not to offer magic. Like, look, I'm just a simple woodcarver. I don't do magic. Oh, crap, you want magic. Okay, so I have magic, and I'm sort of really bad at it. And it sort of feels like to me, at some point, I should do a video discussing how magic works in Disney. And that's an entirely different subject matter itself. The interactions between the characters, I think, is where this movie really really lies. And instead of making it just on Merida and Eleanor, it should have made it involving all of them. Like it turns out, in the original draft intention of the film, Merida would have chosen Prince MacGuffin as her betrothed, and I think that would have been a bit more interesting. Points to Eleanor and Fergus for letting her pick. This also points to the Sultan as well in Latin. Most of these betrothals are made, before they even come of age. Game of Thrones is a good example of that. Sleeping Beauty, Swan Princess. The idea that these two are to be betrothed often happens when they're very young. I think the problem was that, Fergus and Eleanor had three lords who would definitely want to, support or present a son or child to marry into the royal family, and that will probably happen with the three boys. I mean, did the other three not have a girl like at all? But anyway, we're sort of rambling a bit here. Merida is an interesting princess, and it's because she doesn't have that romance aspect. She sort of rejects it in a way that none of her other predecessors had done before. Others had sort of like totally not had the issue on the table. You could say that with Lilo because she's that young, or Nani because, she has other things on her plate, or Mulan because she also has other things on her plate and it's not on her mind. But Merida is rejecting the idea entirely. She wants to be able to decide her own life, her own fate. The problem is she's doing it at the expense of her own personal responsibility. And I personally think this is a flaw that we'll see manifest in its entirety in a later film in the Disney royalty line. So anyway, with that in mind, let's discuss our parallel. And if you watch Game of Thrones, you already know who the parallel is, ladies and gentlemen. It's Arya Stark of Winterfell. Because Arya is the tomboy. Arya does sort of like to do her own thing. And the sort of real shame is where it falls apart is Arya doesn't really think of her mother that much. If you go by the book and the show, she thinks of Sansa, she thinks of Jon, she thinks of her father, and sometimes about Bran, and that's pretty much it. But at the core, we see a character that wants to be free to do her own thing, that doesn't want to marry a lord, doesn't want to have children, doesn't want to do anything. She just wants to be herself. And then it all goes horribly, horribly wrong the only way George R. R. Martin can make it, with murder, betrayal, and a book we're still waiting for. Where are the winds of winter? Anyway, with that in mind, we'll bring this video to a close here. If you're new to the Bucket Think Tank, feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe. If you like this movie, I'd love to hear your favorite parts, your least favorite parts, and whatever. Check out some other videos on this channel. It really helps, and I will catch you all later. This is the Bucket Think Tank signing off. May your fandom serve you well.